first step for making the Stromboli dough is to start with 300 grams of strong white bread flour. So I'm just going to sieve this directly into my mixing bowl, and I've got scales underneath it, so I know exactly how much I'm putting in as I go. God bless digital scales. So next, as is very important in bread making, you need to add 1 teaspoon of fine salt. Distribute as evenly as possible. Now, I'm using fast action yeast, which is ground to a very fine dust, which means that there's no need to pre-mix with warm water. Instead, you can simply empty the small packet into the flour and salt. Stromboli bread is an Italian bread based on olive oil, so we're going to add 2 tablespoons of olive oil at this stage. 1 and 2. Next, add the water. It's very important that the water is lukewarm. I draw it from the tap just as it's starting to get warm. If it's too hot, if it's more than 35 degrees, then you're in danger of killing yeast, in which case your bread simply won't rise. If it's too cold, then the yeast won't wake up and therefore won't allow the bread to rise. So I'm just going to add this now. I'm going to start by adding about half of it. Then using a fork, I'm just going to start working that together. At the point where it starts to come together, add the rest. So now, using an electric dough whisk with 2 dough hooks installed, I'm going to beat this until it goes to a silky smooth consistency. With an electric beater, it takes approximately 6 minutes. So after 6 minutes of aggressive beating with the electric whisk of the dough hooks, we've now got a gloriously smooth, satiny, reasonably wet dough at this stage. Now, I'm feeling this is a little bit too wet, so I'm going to add just a touch more flour. And then I'm going to finish by hand. When the dough is all worked together, add a little olive oil around the outside of the bowl. This is just going to help it when it starts to rise. So I'm just going to tilt that around. Now I'm just going to roll the dough into the olive oil a little bit. Make sure it's coated. Whilst the dough rises, it makes sense to make a start on the stuffing and the ingredients that goes inside this bread when we put it in the oven. So the first of those ingredients is mozzarella. You need approximately 150 grams of good quality mozzarella cheese. Now, your cutting and preparation of the mozzarella needs to be based on function rather than on style. After all, it's all going to get melted. The format I have found best is to cut the mozzarella into long, thin pieces like this. To take that piece there and to slice that into 3 to create long strands like that. Now, put aside in a bowl ready for when you need it. And there, the mozzarella is complete. Thinly stripped into pieces that will be perfect for weaving later into the dough. Next, prepare the basil. Now, I quite like basil. In fact, I love basil, so I'm prepared to go crazy. But if you're not a huge fan of basil, you could go with roughly half this quantity. This is roughly 2 good fistfuls of fresh basil leaves, just trimmed out in the garden right now. The smell is extraordinary. So you want to cut this into vaguely chunky pieces, just under 1 centimetre across. I include the twigs, if you like, the woodier parts. They will disintegrate in the heat in the oven later. So you're left with this. Perfect. Now set aside in a bowl for later. The dough is now doubled in size, so we can now begin to stretch it out into a large rectangular shape. approximately 1.5 centimeters deep throughout the shape. I'm actually using a Teflon sheet here to do this onto, so that I can transfer this straight into the oven on a baking tray. So literally just using my fingers here, I'm just going to start stretching it out. Now, don't be too worried about putting holes through it, because you can just massage the dough back over that. Remember as well, we're going to be rolling this up and creating quite a tight roll, so any holes on the inside you can cover up later. Start with a layer of cheese. Now, after a couple of practices, I've discovered the best way to get the most even distribution after cooking is to go cheese, basil, and then the Parma ham on the top. Now, the Parma ham then kind of seals everything in against the bread and against the dough, and that means that you get a really nice even distribution within the bread. Now just roll these out, get them straight up. Just cover with basil. Do be careful to make sure you get right up to the edges, because you don't want to have crusty end pieces that aren't loaded with flavour like the rest of it. Next up, you want to take about 10 slices of Parma ham and layer these on the top. As I mentioned before, you want to try and use the Parma ham as a seal to hold the cheese and the herbs against the dough. Once the dough is covered, sprinkle with a little black pepper. Next comes the tricky part, rolling it up. So you want to roll from the longer side across. So for me, this is my longer side, conveniently facing towards me. So you want to just start with quite a tight roll at the beginning, literally just tucking it over like this. And then just keep rolling. Nudge. Don't try and pick it all up and do it in one kind of big, bold, sweeping roll. Just roll gently and evenly. Once you get to the end, start tucking it in. Like so. You want to make sure that the ends are well tucked in together so that cheese and other goodness doesn't escape during the cooking process. So you want to make sure you've done that on both ends. Just neatly massage the dough together, pulling bits over each other, linking it together well. Now that the bread is packaged and pretty much ready for the oven, we just need to let it prove. This final stage of rising, if you like, means that the bread has got a nice airy consistency. We knocked a lot of air out as we stretched it out, so now we just need to let it come back naturally. Now, I'd recommend also covering it in cling film, just as standard good practice. You don't have to, particularly with a bread like this, which is quite oily anyway, but wrapping it in cling film will help maintain that moisture. So after leaving the dough approximately 10 minutes to prove, we're ready to transfer it onto a baking tray and to place into the oven. With the dough on the baking tray, we can then begin to garnish. The best garnish to use for this is rosemary. Simply take some long rosemary pieces like this and just push gently into the dough. Four or five pieces should be enough. Then sprinkle liberally with crunchy sea salt. So now it's time to put this into the oven. The oven I've preheated to 200 degrees. We're going to give it a good blasting for 10 minutes and then we'll drop the temperature down just a little bit.